All right, I am with Anne Tokarski here, and we are going to do a very special episode of the Founding Four podcast. Anne and Anya actually will be joining us. But the first task, Anne, that we have for you is going to be because I'm calling you the resident expert of the NWHL. I hope you're okay with that.
Yeah, for sure.
We're rolling with it. So I figured between you and Anya, and I'll sprinkle in a little bit here and there. I think we got it covered. So your first task in this challenge that has artificially created points as determined by me is to give an overview for new fans of the NWHL. You're going to give them an overview in 2 minutes or less, and I'm going to time you right here on the clock. Are you ready, Anne?
I'm ready.
Okay, so because again, you're the resident expert because for the Ice Garden, you've already done this. So I was like, she's not new, she's true. NWHL 101, 2 minutes or less, starting now.
So the National Women's Hockey League, or NWHL, is comprised of 6 teams throughout North America. The Buffalo Beauts, the Boston Pride, the Connecticut Whale, the Metropolitan Riveters, the Minnesota Whitecaps, and the new expansion team, the Toronto Six. Every year so far since the 2015-2016 season, these teams, for the record, 2 of these teams are expansion teams, but the first 4 teams that I mentioned have competed for the past several years in regular season where they just compete with the end goal of winning the Isobel Cup. The Isobel Cup is named for Lord Stanley of NHL fame. His daughter, Lady Isobel, was a hockey player in Canada, and the cup is named for her. So each team so far throughout the history of the NWHL, every team has won an Isobel Cup except for the founding 4 team, one of the founding 4 teams, the Connecticut Whale, and the league's newest expansion team, the Toronto Six. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to this upcoming season where all 6 teams will be competing in a controlled environment in Lake Placid, New York. And I think everyone should tune in.
Oh, nailed it. Look at that. Time to spare.
Wow, yeah.
Crushed it. All right, so as I told you, this is a completely made up game by me, but I also timed Anya. I haven't shown you that, and obviously Anya will not see this. But how do you like your odds?
Oh, I'm not too optimistic. I think I fumbled a little bit, but you know, it is what it is. I think I got the most important points down.
I think you crushed it. I'm going to let you know, since I was on there for both. Anya did not mention why the Isobel Cup is named the Isobel Cup.
Oh.
So that hair flip, there you go. But also, neither one of you hit on that there is the original Isobel Cup and the beautiful picture. I was there in New Jersey as it came out of, its display case for the first time. But the original, of course, design had handles.
Yes, I was thinking about that.
All right, so I'll give you time now since we're going to continue talking for the Founding Four pod, which is named after, of course, as you mentioned, the original 4 NWHL teams. Let's get into a little bit of the handles. So the Isobel Cup originally had 2 beautiful handles, and it hasn't had those handles for quite some time. So, Anne, what do you know about the handles? What should new fans know about the Izzy Cup and the handles?
Well, you mentioned Anya. I don't know if I'm the right person to talk about this, considering she had a hand in dehandling the cup. But from the lore that I've understood and heard, is one of the cup handles Anya broke off, and then because the Isobel Cup couldn't just have one handle, that would it would make it a little lopsided. She tore off the other one just to make things look symmetrical. But that's just what I've heard. I mean, none of that could be completely non-factual. That is just what I've heard.
I've told Anya this before. We need the true story.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody knows the true story. I mean, between Anya, Michelle J, the Boston Pride, the Buffalo Buttes. Of course, those were the first two Isobel Cup winning teams. We have to figure out what happened with those.
Someone there knows something that the rest of us don't.
Someone knows something, including although the handles are no longer, they're not like reattached to the cup. Like, where are they actually now?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think of that. Like, they have to be somewhere. Like, someone's holding on to them.
Someone has them. If Anya says she broke one of them, does she have one? You know, like, is it kind of like I interviewed Rebecca Russo once and she got the hard hat after a Riveters game and she said she just wanted to break it into pieces, like went full Mean Girls on us. Talk to me about that hat you got on there.
Yeah, the hat, it's kind of stylish, babe. You know?
See, it says Riveter of the Game. Is that, what's up with that?
Yeah, so our team hands out a puck of the game and this hat of the game. And Rebecca Morris had it last game up in Buffalo. And she gave it to me today. So I was pretty happy with that. But I mean, I could, you know, if you could rip this hat into pieces, I'd give it to every one of us today because we fought so hard today for that
Did you
win.
really just pull a Mean Girls?
It's just plastic. It's really just... Share it.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely did pull a Mean Girls, but I mean, it's definitely a piece of the hat for everyone today.
Like, is that what it is? Like, does every champion just get a chip from the handles to keep? I want to know. I want to know all the things.
Me too, honestly. I really want to know too.
All right.
You got me thinking.
I know. Now I'm just going to have to get Anya on again. You know, she distracted me with Waylon. So I didn't get to get into the deep diving, hard hitting questions. Of course, that's Anya Packer and Madison, their new baby Waylon Packer. But okay, Anne, let's get into, you and I have talked about this before, and I'm sure all of the people that follow your amazing work at the Ice Garden know a little bit, but for new fans, we're really gearing this toward new fans. First, I'd like for you to go over how you got into women's hockey and some of the things that you do, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the NWHL.
So I would say I really got into women's hockey. I'd kind of followed the NWHL and followed women's hockey a little bit from its conception, with the NWHL's conception in 2015 when I was like 13 years old. But I would say my biggest, like my first real foray into the women's hockey world was the 2018 Olympics in Pyeongchang. I remember I stayed up to watch. It was like 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. in Chicago, and I stayed up on a school night. I think it was a school night. I had like finals the next day or something, and I stayed up to watch. And I remember waking up and I was like, did I dream that? Did they really win their first gold medal in 20 years? And I guess from there, it kind of spiraled into, I got more active on women's hockey Twitter, following all the teams. And then in September of 2019, Eleni Domestahas and Michelle J asked me if I would join, or if I would submit an application to join the Ice Gardens team. And everything from there is history, I guess.
I love it. Fantastic. You're such an amazing voice in
Thank
the
you.
women's hockey space. Of course. And the Ice Garden, of course, I also was a part of the Ice Garden. Still love what the Ice Garden is doing. I know just today, one of the many stories that I saw as I was perusing through the WoHo news was Mike talking about stats. What's your engagement? What's your thoughts about the access to women's hockey stats as it exists right now?
Well, I think stats are super important. Obviously, the eye test is very important when you're actually watching women's hockey and able to decipher good plays from bad plays. But I think knowing stats and knowing box scores and knowing who's scored in what games and who gets the assists is tremendously important, both for tracking like personal player records and also just tracking like from a team standpoint, like the offense, and the goals for and the goals against of a certain team. I think that's hugely important as a measurement and a landmark of certain teams' growth. And so that's why I think it's pretty important. And I think the work that Mike Murphy is doing with Her Hockey Counts and the work that Bo Marchwick is doing with Elite Prospects to preserve women's hockey data is super important, just so we have a record of all the amazing players that are playing right now, because I know there's not a lot of footage from the past, there's not a lot of stats from the past. So I think it's incredibly important that we have that moving forward, we have these stats and we have this history.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Bo as well. Can't forget Elite Prospects. And absolutely, I'm definitely more of an eye test person, but you made an absolutely wonderful case for why the stats matter. And in Mike's latest piece, he also talks about that the athletes themselves are really focused on the stats. Here that we might get some stats news, and that there's even more of an impetus on stats going into the NDubble, or the bubble season, as we like to call it. But so we'll have to see. Anya teased that a little bit, so we'll see if we get an announcement. Yeah, we'll see if we get an announcement soon. But I want to get back to the NWHL. So we did the quick 101 version. Here we are. We are at on the cusp of entering a new year, 2021, which I alluded to it a little bit just now. The NWHL will be in a bubble, so they will have a single site, essentially a single site season. It's very condensed, but I want to get your thoughts again, because you're my resident expert. You have put together a fantastic intro guide for women's hockey. When you think about the 2021 season for the NWHL in particular, what are some of the things that you are really excited about to follow in 2021?
I think there are a lot of interesting storylines to follow. From a team perspective, I mean, there's Rebecca Russo coming back, there's Kelly Babstock joining the Riveters, but also from a broader perspective, I think the introduction of Whale GM General Manager Amy Shear, I think that's going to be huge, just in terms of partnerships for the Whale and getting the Whale onto a bigger stage. And I think that before she left the Whale, Bray Ketchum-Peel did an amazing job recruiting players to join that squad. And so I would say what I'm most looking forward to this bubble season is the Whale, just because I think this could be their year, because like I mentioned before, they're the only team of the founding four not to have won an Isobel Cup yet. So I think this could be their year.
There we go. Talking about data and trends, of course, we all know that actually Anya put it this way: COVID claimed the 2020 Cup. So that does still mean that a founding four team can win the Isobel Cup. And of course, that would be the Connecticut Whale. I have them prominently featured here on my faux tree. Yeah, actually, Laura Brennan made that for the team, and she offered ornaments to the broadcasters as well. So I'm very thankful for that. I have it for over a year now. Yeah, and so yeah, I'm excited. Of course, as someone who has been on the call for Connecticut Whale teams for the past 3 seasons, actually 3 seasons now. That's a team that has definitely struggled. I love that you mentioned Bray Ketchum-Peel, of course, an OG Riveter when she played in the league, but made her way as you mentioned, as general manager for the Connecticut Whale. But also Amy, who had worked with the New York Rangers, has a totally different skill set, as opposed to Bray, who had been a player at Yale and then, of course, with the Riveters in the NWHL. But that leads me to also wanting to ask you, Anne, about interim commissioner Ty Tumminia. There's a new model for the NWHL, as opposed to all of the NWHL and essentially the front office owning the founding four teams, plus then the Minnesota Whitecaps. Once we got the news that the Toronto Six joined the fold, Ty Tumminia was a part of that expansion. Then we saw that the NWHL switched to a governance model. And so this, I know I had to talk to Anya and a few other people to kind of understand the governance model. But Anne, how would you summarize the shift from what we saw in the first 5 seasons of the NWHL to what we will now see in season 6, with the addition of not only the Toronto Six, but also Tumminia and the governance model?
Well, I would say the new oh my goodness, I can't speak. I'm sorry. The governance model, it gives a lot more flexibility and room to teams, and I think it'll increase the level of competition for sure, just because there's a lot more accessibility to different resources for teams with the new governance model. At least the teams that are independently owned right now, like the Boston Pride and the Toronto Six, I think we're definitely going to see some differences in the competition level just based on what resources the players have available to them. But otherwise, I think it was a great move by the league to shift to a governance model. I can't say that I completely understand all of the intricacies of the new model, but I would say it's a step in the right direction to ensuring that all of the athletes are treated equally and treated professionally.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that I understand, and I really asked Ani, I was like, all right, explain this to me like, I'm baby way, because I need help understanding. I think the biggest thing, my takeaway was that with the governance model, now there are multiple eyes on the 6 teams as a whole, as opposed to at the time just Danny Ryland. And of course, we know Danny Ryland is the founder of the NWHL and former commissioner. She has now taken on the responsibility of the 4 teams. And so that would be the Minnesota Whitecaps, the Connecticut Whale, the Metropolitan now Riveters, and the Buffalo Beauts. Those are the 4 teams that are not, as you mentioned, independently owned. Danny Ryland Kearney now has taken on the responsibility of finding ownership for those 4 teams. And so whereas Danny was basically like the one person, I get the sense that the governance model, and there is a governor, so to speak, for each of the 6 teams. I've been trying to find out who these governors are. I'm still working on that.
I'm
We'll
really
see.
interested because I didn't realize that that meant each team had like a representative
Correct.
until you just mentioned it. But now I'm like kind of like, ooh, like I really want to know who's
Yeah,
each team's
I'm
governor.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
Ooh, I'm
So I
excited.
think, yeah, you should inquire as well. But yeah, that's the sense that I get, that each team has a representative, and it's now truly a board, right? So 6 individuals who represent their respective team, but then collectively represent the league. And that creates a different checks and balances, if we're being honest, than when you have the founder who also serves as the commissioner. When I spoke to Tumminia, she now is responsible, similar to if we were to just use a hockey model that people are most probably familiar with. If we use the NHL as a model to just kind of summarize what we're trying to say, if Gary Bettman were the owner of all, what is it now, 32 teams, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That's what the NWHL used to be. Gary Bettman owned all of those teams, so decisions could be made by Gary and his front office. But of course, we know that that's not how the NWHL, or excuse me, the NHL runs. The NHL has ownership, and those owners have stock. And essentially, Gary Bettman, as the commissioner of the NHL, is responsible for executing what the owners or that board of owners what they want to see put forth. And then the other piece that Gary, as essentially the commissioner, is responsible for is also the NHL Players Association.
Mhm.
And so now that's another thing that's extremely important, is that now the Players Association becomes essentially a partner and becomes a voice in a more structured way than we've seen in the past, to how the league moves forward. And I think that's really exciting. We've already seen, of course, the 50-50 revenue split, which means that any sponsor that comes in, Twitch is a perfect example. Whatever money Twitch offers to be able to exclusively broadcast the regular season of the NWHL. 50% of that goes to now Tumminia and the NWHL for them to use. And then the other 50% goes to the NWHL Players Association, which of course, Anya Packer, formerly Bottolino, who was a member of the Connecticut Whale, they can use to their discretion. And so the way that the NWHLPA, though, has chosen to use that revenue split is to offer a percentage of that split directly to the players. So it's not as though the PA itself is getting that money. There's actually not really much of an income for the PA. The PA has opted to divert those revenue splits directly to players. So when it comes to salary, and this is still a little bit of a question mark, but Anne, again, I'd love to get your thoughts on diving into what we know about how the NWHL salary works and how this 50-50 revenue split impacts the salary of NWHL players.
Well, I think the 50-50 revenue split is huge. It's tremendous. It's a tremendous step forward for the players who already have to work non-hockey jobs to keep themselves afloat. Obviously, the goal is to have these players play hockey as their primary job and not have to worry about a non-hockey job. And while that might not be super imminent in the future for most of the players currently in the league, I think the NWHLPA is taking pretty impressive strides towards making that a reality. And I think, it's not something you can expect right away, but it's something that you can expect work towards right away. And it's something that you can expect people will be advocating for right away. And so you might not see the result right away, but you can see the work being put in to get to that point.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And, we've seen a lot of different partnerships spark. And we still want to see if some of those partnerships stick. I would say, especially the NBC partnership that we see as far as broadcast. So Twitch still is a part of that. It's a 3-year deal. This 2021, the 2021 season will be the second year of the 3-year deal, excuse me. But then we see also that the NWHL is going to have the 2 semifinal games and the Isobel Cup final game, so 3 total, on NBC Sports Network, which of course the slogan goes NHL on NBC, but now we will have NWHL on NBC. And your thoughts about that broadcast deal announcement?
Well, I think that broadcast deal was pretty impressive for a league in its 6th year. That was built pretty much from the ground up, I would say. I know there are some people who aren't super happy with it and don't think that NBC deserves a lot of recognition for it, and I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, I don't think NBC deserves so much credit for finally stepping in, but I think it's definitely impressive that the league was able to engineer this deal. And even if it is only for 3 games, I still think that's impressive. And I'm definitely going to be watching. I'm suddenly so glad that my family still has cable.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Absolutely. And I hear you. When it comes to being late in the game, we know how much amazing women's hockey there is that you can stream if you're lucky or pay membership to and watch, but it's very rare that we get women's hockey in particular on broadcast television at prime time nonetheless. But this is what I will offer, because you know me, I'm always pushing for more. But what I will offer is that I see this as an extremely important first step, because if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that for whatever reason, I certainly have theories as to the reasons, but we'll leave that to the side for now. And for whatever reason, more broadcast television partners have put on more women's sports on their network. So even the WNBA, who will celebrate their 25th season next year in 2021, they've seen more network television broadcasts than certainly in the last several years. And with that uptick, the NWSL, National Women's Soccer League, I should add, has also seen that. And actually, the uptick for the NWSL was literally off the charts. I mean, they had to wrap that graphic back around because there was such an increase. But between the WNBA going into their 25th season, and if I'm not mistaken, by next season, the NWSL will be in their 9th season, which is unprecedented for women's soccer. We've seen that as the amount of the number of games on national television in particular, so putting aside their NWSL, excuse me, had a Twitch deal, putting aside the league pass that the WNBA has. When you're on ESPN, when you're on ABC, when you're on NBC, the number of viewership has skyrocketed. And so, do you think that we'll see a similar trend for the NWHL as they now are on NBC?
I'm really hopeful that we will, but I know you've talked about in the past hockey culture and how, there are some people out there who are insistent upon dragging women's hockey down, but I think there are more people who just haven't been exposed to it, and those people are going to be flipping through their channels in the beginning of February and see, oh my gosh, women's hockey, this is professional women's hockey on TV. And I think that number of people who might not know about it is going to far outweigh the number of people that have something negative to say. And so I do think that the NWHL is going to see an increase in viewership, and I think it could lead to some pretty big gains for the league moving forward.
I'm excited to see. And I guess we should preface that the NWHL has never been on national network television.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever the numbers are, if it's just you and I, Anne, that's already an increase of 100%.
True. Yeah.
So, no, but I put that all in context that truly, from a stats perspective, this will be a benchmark and a baseline. And I think the challenge for the NWHL and truly all of women's hockey at the professional level, because again, we haven't talked much about the PWHPA, but the challenge then will be to see what these metrics are with the NBC's sports deal, and then use that as the benchmark. 3 games, this is the viewership that we can get on national television in 3 games. And now how do we expound upon that? It's the same thing that I said about the PWHPA announcing that they got $1 million from Secret, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
$1 million goes really quickly in a women's hockey league, because they have a similar, I think they're at about 5 regions, which is very close to 6 teams if you think of it that way. 1 million for one sponsor, great, but that's now the benchmark, and everything has to be 1 million plus from here on out. And I'm excited to see what's going to happen.